Welcome to Evidently Speaking by Project Evident. I'm Sarah Troia. Project Evident harnesses the power of data, evidence, and technology for greater impact. Evidently Speaking explores the stories core to this mission and highlights the insights and successes of nonprofit practitioners and our partners. Project Evident worked with the technology and program leads of 13 nonprofits to co-create a practical and actionable Equitable AI Adoption Framework. The episodes in this series each examine one component of the framework and feature the experience and expertise of our partners. This episode is focused on safe and fair AI practice. For the Equitable AI Adoption Framework, we focus on how organizations develop and train on ethical AI guidelines and principles. While this episode focuses on safe and fair AI practice, these practices, they need to harmonize with your data policy. Data and information, they're the fuel that make AI work. If you want to learn more about data policies, listen to our episode titled Data Governance and Risk. We're going to start by hearing from Eduardo Hernandez. He's the Executive Vice President of AI Technology Solutions at Scholas. Scholas is a national nonprofit that opens doors to technology careers for people who've been traditionally left out of the industry. They provide tuition-free training and connect graduates with employers who need their skills. Eduardo and his team have utilized AI for many different areas of their program model. One example is they've built an AI assistant tool that helps learners with assignments, certification prep, and confidence building.
We were at an inflection point in probably early 2024 when ChatGPT really became prominent, and we started observing instructors, curriculum folks starting to use prompting, and there was all this AI stuff. And then we started seeing learners, and this is part of that anxiety at first, like, oh my God, we have to add some kind of guidelines really quick.
What I want to note about Eduardo's story is that even before Scholas had purchased a single AI license, they recognized they needed AI guidelines. The reality is that free AI, it's already available to everyone. That means every organization needs AI guidelines, even if you're at step 0 on your AI adoption journey. Before we turn back to Eduardo, you'll hear folks in this episode talk about both AI guidelines and AI policies, and those are different things. Guidelines are best practices. You're encouraging staff to follow. Policies are legally binding. They're meant to reduce an organization's legal risk, and there can be ramifications if a staff member does not follow a policy. Back to Eduardo.
It's just a little easier to put out guidelines, right? Policy requires a little bit more work. So we're like, let's just put something out there so that people can be aware that a policy is kind of coming. So that's kind of the way we framed it. For now, this is what you can do, what you shouldn't do. And then we rolled out the formal policy.
For Scholas, starting with AI guidelines instead of an AI policy was about the urgency to get something in place quickly. But for other organizations, crafting AI guidelines instead of AI policies was an intentional choice.
We started with the thinking of let's create a policy, but pretty soon we realized that was not the path for us. And we ended up more writing together a guidelines. And that guidelines is evolving as tech around it is evolving as well.
That's Rakesh Verma. He's Vice President of Product and Technology at Catalyst Exchange. Catalyst Exchange empowers mission-driven organizations in education, public, and social sectors. They provide practical guidance and connect organizations with expertise, tools, and hands-on support to drive meaningful and measurable outcomes. Rakesh and his team use AI to accelerate making sense of complex data to generate actionable insights.
People across all the teams started experimenting with AI, trying out different tools, using different assistants, helping them take notes or summaries, or helping them to do small operational tasks. That was, I would say, the stage of excitement, all the possibilities, discoveries. But I think pretty quickly that excitement was met with a lot of concerns. Some team members were worried about the data privacy. Some started questioning, hey, there are environmental impact. There are set of unknowns that we don't even know about it. Some started worrying about automations potentially impacting their jobs. So energy started to feel inconsistent and uncertain. That is when it became clear that we needed to create something to guide us and not to restrict the innovation or take away all the voices around those concerns, but to build a shared understanding. And that's where we first thought, let's start creating a policy. But policy was conflicting with what we were driving towards. So we realized we needed guidelines, something flexible that could evolve as our learning evolves, which could help everyone feel safer and more aligned along the way. Yeah, I feel we're still in the early journey. We're learning, we're refining, we are figuring out what ethical AI truly is. But the feeling of listening all the voices who had to contribute to creating those guidelines made us feel we're all together into it and we're not perfect on the day one. So that whole feeling of doing it together, not kind of judging us to be perfect first time, made us feel really grounded.
Once an organization has decided between AI guidelines or an AI policy, how do you actually create it? Rakesh talked about developing AI guidelines as a team and how it can feel a little bit like a potluck party.
We started by inviting our executive team. So that was the first table. We needed alignment at the top that AI was something we were going to engage with thoughtfully, not avoid. Some people across the team were not comfortable yet, and which was understandable. So getting that shared buy-in at the top was critical before we brought everyone else to the table. After that, we got AI champions identified from each of the team who brought their perspective and in some cases also brought a dish to the potluck dinner party. The tech team, I would say, brought the main course, all the tool stacks that we can use, what are the different possibilities, and how long some of those possibilities would take. Operations, I would say, brought some of the nutrition. Hey, we need to make sure that we look into all the privacy and data concerns that we're hearing from everyone all around. Our programs team brought the flavors. How does it impact our partners and then providers? And I think it was fun to kind of talk and listen all the voices. To be frank, the dishes I loved the most were the ones that sparked honest and sometimes uncomfortable conversations. What really made it meaningful was how every team member contributed their voice to the table.
For smaller organizations working to create guidelines that are safe and fair, the process might be a little more intimate. It's still a potluck, but it has fewer attendees. Take Sarah Gripshover, Director of Research at the Project for Educational Research That Scales, or PERTS. PERTS is an organization that works to provide resources for educators to create the conditions for young people to feel like they belong in school, such as providing coursework that feels meaningful and relevant to their lives, and that helps students feel like adults believe in them. Sarah's organization, PERTS, is earlier in their AI journey. They're currently developing and beta testing an AI tool to recommend practices for educators to use in their classroom.
PERTS is a really small organization. So we're a nonprofit. There's 14 full-time employees at PERTS. So everything we do is going to be kind of smaller scale and a little bit more intimate than what you might see at a bigger company. So, for us, developing a policy looked like me and Chris kind of working on a document together.
Chris, who Sarah just mentioned, is PERT's Director of Technology. Okay, back to Sarah.
We had Dave, our executive director, review it, surface legal issues and things like that. And then we talked about it with the team. We showcased it at our retreat. We got people's feedback. And then, Chris did a lot of research on his end to figure out like what the LLM privacy policies look like, what they're actually doing with the data. So he used his technical expertise to figure all of that out.
So, whether you're creating AI guidelines or an AI policy, they're best when developed through a team effort. So, when Scholas moved from AI guidelines to an AI policy, they also sought input from many stakeholders. They included their career coaches, members of the learner support team, the tech team, legal, and their learners. Now, the content of their AI policy, Eduardo, it distills into 4 key principles.
Responsibility, or responsible AI, which is safeguarding human rights, protecting learner data, and setting clear rules against misuse. This is where we really needed to really hammer this down on the data. So that's where it really went from guideline into policy. Like we're dealing with learner data, we're dealing with training data. We didn't want people accidentally exposing us or our learners to something, right? So the responsibility, especially on the data piece, was big on the transformation to principles. We also wanted to hold ourselves accountable to independent feedback. We wanted the transparency, explaining why we're doing these things with AI, and guidelines kind of fall short on that. And then we wanted to empower pairing our AI with human ability so that technology amplifies people instead of replacing them. We really wanted to set the tone for this AI native organization. And the final part is the inclusivity. And this is making sure AI represents the diversity of the learners and communities we serve. So as we were building out our AI policies, we were also piloting programs like our tool Resume Boost using the guidelines we had already established, but they weren't formalized yet. And let me give you a real story. So as we started piloting this Resume Boost, we saw that AI sometimes downplayed transferable skills from retail or service jobs. And that was a wake-up call to us because we realized that without this being really clear in the AI policy, biases could creep in and hurt the very learners we were trying to uplift. So the story I share is write policies that explicitly check for equity and fairness, because if we haven't, we might have unintentionally closed door for people.
But creating safe and fair AI practices and then making sure your team is following them, those are actually 2 different things. Sarah has some advice to share.
I would say, make sure you understand the policy. Make sure the people in charge really understand the policy. And, I think if people understand conceptually what the risks are, that goes a lot farther towards making people able to make effective decisions than just kind of having a bunch of bulleted stuff, right? Like a conceptual understanding, I think, goes a longer way than a bunch of rules.
Rakesh also has thoughts about making sure your team is following your safe and fair AI practices.
The first thing that I would say is listen. So as we shaped our AI guidelines, we made sure everyone had a voice into it because people support what they help create. Second, communicate, not just once, but continuously in the meetings or Slack chats. Real examples of how guidelines showed up in everyday work. Do a little more show about it when it shows up. Third, learn and adapt. It's important to treat AI implementation as a journey and not as a milestone. The guideline evolves as our understanding grows. I could look back to one moment that really stuck with me during a team conversation when we were discussing to use AI to summarize a partner meeting that we had. Someone paused and said, "Hey, wait, let's make sure that we're not including the details partner did not agree to share." It was a simple comment and could be in any other meeting, but it said everything to me. We actually ended up changing our AI guideline. We actually ended up changing our AI tool setting, where before the meeting, if we intend to record a meeting, it would send a message to asking for agreements. That's when I realized guidelines were starting to live. We're still in very early journey, but guidelines is not a checklist, it's a mindset. and it takes time to change. And I think I'm proud to be able to celebrate those small moments with the team.
Your staff, they already have access to AI. Safe and fair AI practices should be every organization's priority. Choosing between developing AI guidelines or AI policy is about what's right for your organization with respect to wanting flexibility and managing risk. While there's no right way to develop safe and fair AI practices, all 3 of the organizations we interviewed chose an inclusive process. And that process meant they benefited from the richness of diverse perspectives and enhanced buy-in for compliance. When nonprofits lead with AI safety and fairness, they ensure AI serves their mission and their values. If taking the first step feels overwhelming, I want to leave you with the practical perspective from Sarah of PERTS.
I think there's a tendency when it comes to AI tools, like even just the word artificial intelligence, it just makes it sound like we're in a Terminator movie or something, right? Like it's scary, it's like anxiety provoking, but I think, these tools are just tools. They're no more, they're no less. And so when you kind of approach it like a tool, you realize like, okay, well, there are risks. We can know what the risks are. There's lots of information out there. We can read that information and, we can figure out how to incorporate these tools in a sensible way and reduce the risks. I mean, that's what we just do every day anyway. We're just doing it in a new context.
Thank you for listening to Evidently Speaking by Project Evident. I'm Sarah Troia. At Project Evident, we work to build trusting partnerships and expand access to tools so leaders have what they need to improve outcomes. We believe that when practitioners are equipped with actionable data and evidence, stronger and more meaningful outcomes for students and communities become a reality. To learn more about our mission and work, visit projectevident.org.